Hi everyone, welcome to Accessibility 101. I have to say that this module, although at the end, is one of my favorites because accessibility has really been my passion, especially lately. So here I'm going to start off with just laying the foundation for you with just accessibility practices. And I'm going to lay the foundation first, and then I'm going to ask you to apply these practices within some of the products that we are provided from AI. So the roadmap here is we're going to talk about why accessibility. So why is this even relevant? Then I'm going to go into tips for Word documents, tips for presentations. I'm going to provide some resources and then provide an opportunity. I want you to write down within your notes any questions that you might have. So first of all, why accessibility? So creating accessible documents, presentations benefit a wide variety of individuals. Mainly, right, those who utilize screen readers. So someone who is blind or with low vision generally cannot access a computer traditionally using vision. What they do is they use either software or built-in features of the computer, the tablet, or the phone that will read the entire screen. So it's something called a screen reader, and it is generally controlled by keyboard shortcuts. So they use the keyboard to navigate, and they hear everything that is in the computer and what is on the screen. And in order for this to work effectively, there are certain pieces of the document that need to be arranged appropriately so that the individual can navigate it. In addition to individuals who are blind, those with alternative access, so someone who might be utilizing a switch, so maybe like a button instead of utilizing a mouse, or some individuals instead of a mouse will navigate through the keyboard. So they use their vision, but also use keyboard shortcuts. And anyone who might be neurodiverse, so thinking about engaging with computers and different material, abiding by accessibility practices can be very important for individuals who are neurodiverse. In addition to that, and what I really want to emphasize is that abiding by accessibility practices can benefit a wide variety of individuals. Now, with this infographic, I also want to highlight that in no way am I minimizing or equating a permanent disability with a situational. So I want to make sure that I make this abundantly clear that in this infographic, in no way am I trying to equate these situations. However, what I want to demonstrate, especially for individuals who might be reluctant to incorporate accessibility practices, is that being accessible can benefit a wide variety of individuals, not just individuals with disabilities. And what I find is working with many organizations, businesses, corporations, I need to highlight that it benefits the masses and benefits a larger group versus just the group with disabilities. Although we have a huge population of individuals with disabilities, but it's kind of revealing that it benefits everyone. And this infographic is actually published through Microsoft, and they do an accessibility summit every spring, and it actually is really powerful. So I do like this because it just highlights that accessibility practices can benefit a wide variety of individuals. In addition to just being good practice to making sure that everyone is equitably accessing material, Section 508 of ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, in the Rehabilitation Act, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act states that requires access to information and communication technology developed, procured, and maintained or used by federal agencies, ensuring access for people with physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities. So any organization that receives federal funding under Section 508 is required to ensure that anyone with physical, sensory, or cognitive disability has access to technology that is either developed, procured, maintained, or used by these federal agencies. This is a link to Section 508, but when I say federal agencies, I mean public schools, state universities, towns, everyone is covered who receives federal funding is covered under Section 508. And within Section 508, it also requires that any public facing I'm laughing because it's not abided by and I it's almost comical to talk about this because so few organizations abide by this. But Section 508 requires every online platform as well, run by federal bodies or organizations, to be accessible for all users. And the criteria that they utilize is something called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I call them the WCAG. Some people just say WCAG. It was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, and there are 3 levels of success criteria. Level A, which is basic, level AA, which is strong accessibility, and AAA, which is excellent. Section 508 requires AA. And you will see when I go over color contrast, the color contrast is designated by level single A, AA, or AAA. And so this is why I want to kind of talk about this at the beginning, because it is referenced later on. And so for any of you who are working for a public school or a public university or a government or town department or organization, you are obligated to abide by Section 508 with any public-facing material. And so making sure that your material is accessible is really important. And so I'm going to share these basic accessibility practices that if you or your team or your colleagues implement will just help abide by Section 508, but increase the access for anyone who is engaging with your content. So I'm going to start off with documents because those are the most popular and, the most, I say low-hanging fruit, because if we incorporate many of these practices within our general content creation flow, it really improves the accessibility. So these are the key kind of aspects that I'm going to go over. Document title, heading styles, list structure, alternative text, column headers, and descriptive link text. So the document title, so I'm not talking about the name. So when we go to save as on a document, that's the name. What I'm talking about is the document title. And why this is important is this describes the function or the purpose, and it's actually the first content that's announced by screen readers. And so this is embedded, again, within the properties of the actual document. And so I have screenshots within my presentation to just kind of show what it might look like within Microsoft Word or Google Documents. What I also want to highlight is that Microsoft Word across different platforms does look different. I have a Mac, so when I'm taking screenshots and showing steps, I utilized a Mac, and so mine might look a little bit different. So know that. So you might, if you're following along and kind of adjusting things, you might need to kind of modify. And I will say that I have Google Doc on here. However, it is not the preferred accessible platform. I know that many schools use Google Documents, but when it comes to accessibility, Microsoft Word is far superior. So I do kind of want to say that if you are looking for the most accessible platform. So in Microsoft Word titles, and to check that, what you want to do is you go into File, Properties, and you click Summary. So on my screen, I have kind of that menu there, and you add the descriptive title. So what is important to also check is that depending on where your subscription is kind of attributed, or whoever purchased your subscription to your Microsoft Word, it will also put the author attribute. So if someone else created the document and you've edited it, or if it was a template, the author might be listed as someone else. So it's also important to make sure that the author is correct. And this is where you then put the title, and making sure that it is appropriate, right? And not the template. And that's what sometimes happens, is that if the document originated from a template, the template original name could be under the title and cause some confusion. So we want to put the appropriate title that is descriptive. And in this menu, there's a lot of information, but really the requirement is title and author. And then we hit OK. So now on to your document. Oh, sorry, I didn't have Google Docs on this one, because in Google Docs, what they say, and this is where it kind of feels weird, but is that they embed the name and the title consecutively. So as long as you update the name, the title is also fixed. Now onto your document. And so here these are general guidelines. So in section 508, I will say for the fonts in particular, this is not a legal requirement. This is a suggestion. So ADA also the Americans with Disabilities Act also provides just general guidance around providing accessibility, the most accessible materials. And so when it comes to fonts and developing content, the recommendation is to have sans serif fonts, which have slightly higher readability. And so again, this is not a requirement, but when you are creating content and you want to have the highest probability of everyone being able to engage equitably with your content, I have on my screen a screenshot. So serif fonts, which is traditionally like Times New Roman, have like the little, the only way I can describe them, the serifs are like flags at like the bottom and sometimes at the top of the letters. Sans serif don't have those flags. And so I will say that like initially, I don't know if you've ever like identified with a font in your notes, if you want to share like identifying with a font. Like for me, I always had like Georgia was like the font that I identified with. And then coming and researching more about accessibility, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a serif font. And so now I've like changed and I use either like Tahoma, or I have this other like Encode, I don't know, something else in Google Docs that is a sans serif font. And so jot down if you have a font that you associate with, or you can laugh at me and think that I'm really corny. But this is something, especially in my emails, that I've updated and changed, just so that, again, because we have so much written communication, and I want to make sure that I have the highest probability that everyone can read and access what I'm sharing. So this next piece is required by Section 508, and this is something that I will say that I've integrated into all of my practices and has significantly improved my document navigation, in addition to increasing my accessibility. And so this is word heading styles. So your headings should match the list structure of the document because it enhances the navigation. And so this, I will say, I hated this previously because for me, I visually was frustrated with the formatting. So in Microsoft Word, it's generally on your home ribbon and it's under styles. And so under the ribbon, you can do like the quick menu, but I prefer to have the styles pane where it's open on the right-hand side. What frustrates me a lot is that Microsoft Word has these like default blue fonts, and that was always very frustrating for me. Anytime I hit the styles, it would change my font into blue that I hated. But what I learned is that if you come over to the headings, and if I wanted to then, establish a heading number 1, if I right click on it, it then says update to match selection. So I can then keep my heading structure and keep my styles, right? Like if I want bold and I want my, Tahoma font, it keeps that, but it embeds the heading behind it. So I still get my heading structure. And here under Google Docs, right, this is kind of where you can also do that, where it has it in the banner and it's not under styles, it just has it listed under title. And you can do the same thing, it arrows over and you can do update to match selection. So here's the application question. So I would like you to write this in your notes. Looking at this document that I have on my screen, what accessibility improvement could be made in this styles menu? So I've already talked about this. So just jot down in your notes from what I've previously talked about, what recommendation would you make to this document already. And also what I find is checking your headings in Microsoft Word. This is where my document navigation has been enhanced. So I utilize the navigation pane. This is where I can check for style headings as well. I go to view on my ribbon and I go to check navigation pane, and that's where you click the 3 dots with the 3 lines and the navigation pane comes up. So this shows, it's almost like your table of contents, but not as annoying as the table of contents formatting if you've done that. But this here, and I click on anything and it immediately jumps to that section. So if you're working with a longer document, it is amazing because you don't have to scroll through, especially if you're presenting. And if you want to jump through and edit a section or look at something and see your flow. So I love that I can look at my kind of document outline, make sure it flows. This also shows that I have my appropriate heading structures, right? So I have heading 1, heading 1, heading 1, heading 1, heading 2, and then I have my structure of heading 2, heading 3. So it pulls it all together. This is also an easy way for me to check to see if a document has headings and if it's appropriate. I now utilize this on every single document that I create, again, because it enhances my navigation so immensely. And especially for those of you who are working on longer papers, dissertations, I highly recommend that you incorporate heading styles consistently if you're doing student policies and procedures, applications, because not only is it required for accessibility practices, but it really does enhance all navigation for everyone. And this navigation pane, again, I find is just really crucial. And especially if you're presenting on, like, sharing your screen, it eliminates a lot of that scrolling. That can cause some visual distress for any of your kind of individuals who might be watching or participating in your virtual meeting. So the next piece of a Microsoft Word document that is required by 508 compliance is bulleted formats. And I think this is something that most people use. So this is important because it enhances screen reader navigation. The screen reader will then announce that there is a list with 4 items. So whenever you have a list, you want to ensure that you click the bulleted list and it formats within a list. And I know I've been guilty of this before. The formatting doesn't abide by what I'm looking for. So I undo the formatting and I just hit a dash. You do not want to put that because then the screen reader does not know it's a list and it just says dash and then it reads your content. So it gets confusing for the individual who is listening. And it's very important that they have the indication, right, that there is a list. Because if there's a list with, 27 items, a visual reader has the agency and the independence to be able to say, I'm going to skip that list, right? I don't want to listen to that, or I don't want to read that. You want to provide that choice and that independence and agency to someone who is also listening with a screen reader. If they don't hear list with 27 items, they then have to go through and listen to all of it or try and skip it, and they don't know when it's going to end. And so it really provides a level of frustration. And again, if you're doing an application or policies and procedures, you're kind of increasing that level of frustration and anxiety for someone who is utilizing a screen reader. So really, making sure that you use that bulleted list format is crucial. The next piece is alternative text. And this is something where Microsoft Word has integrated AI specifically in their alternative text. I will say it's pretty terrible, but it's there. What I don't really like about it is that it will then sometimes say that alternative text was generated, but it's not great. So there is the button on my screen. You can see when you right click on an image, you choose alternative text. And there's a button at the bottom that says generate alt text for me. I find it generally doesn't help because you want to make sure that you describe the picture within context. And you want to, you put in a picture for a reason. So if you just did it for decoration, right? Because I do that a lot. Sometimes, I have memes, I have different things that are funny. And for me, I actually describe my memes because that indicates a piece of my personality, right? Like I want someone who is utilizing a screen reader to see and engage with my memes. But there are other things when I have like welcome images or banners that are purely decorative. So I want the screen reader to skip them. So that's where you would mark it as decorative because then the screen reader skips it. But if it is essential to the content, you want to ensure that you create an alternative text. And so I have here, I have a picture of teas that illustrate, right, the difference between serif and sans serif. And what I want to show you is that I am very guilty of copying and pasting images off the internet. I understand that that is not copyright compliant, but what I want to highlight for you is that when you copy and paste pictures off the internet, oftentimes the alt text comes with them. And the alt text is generally not what you're looking for. Here, this alt text is just focusing on the title of the article that this went along with. It did not describe the picture. But Microsoft Word is like, oh, you have an alt text for your picture, you're good, right? So you want to make sure that you double check things. So here's my alternative text, and I'm not good because I tend to be too wordy. What I want to tell you is that ADA also recommends that you do not write picture of or image of in your alternative text because the screen reader automatically says that. The screen reader automatically says image of. So if you write anything like image or picture of, it's a repetitive, right? The screen reader says image of, and then you hear picture of or screenshot of, right? So I still use screenshot sometimes, right? And I'm too wordy at times, but so what I would like you to do in your application, so there's an application there, but you can see my alternative text, which is not perfect. What I want you to do is update that. So what would your alternative text be? So I want you to fix mine because mine is incorrect. What would yours be for that picture? And again, think about what's the function. So write that in your notes to submit. And it's hard. And what I also find too is I use speech to text to describe my pictures. And sometimes it makes it too wordy and I go back and forth. But I also find too, if I'm working with a specific community where I'm, creating newsletters for, again, a community, I will then ask, or if I'm teaching a class and I know I have students who are blind, like I'm teaching a class right now with multiple students who engage with screen readers. So then I ask them for feedback, like how are my alternative texts, right? Like how are you engaging with the material? Is there anything I can do to improve that, right? So you also want to ask that question, right? Get feedback and know, because sometimes I just get too wordy because that's what happens with me. And here's alternative text is not only for individuals who are blind, who are using screen readers. If any of you use a mail agent on your phone, so for example, I have an iPhone, and instead of using like the Outlook app for my email, I utilize the native mail app, and I have like the share a little bit of the email. I'm losing the word right now, but I can see a little bit of the email, like tease the email in my list of emails. And so what happens often is many organizations will put banners at the beginning of their emails and not add an alternative text, or allow the tool to use AI to generate alternative text. So I just have on my screen here 2 examples. So with no alternative text here, I have a blue and white logo description automatically generated with low confidence. This is the logo for the organization. And they're telling, right, like, good afternoon. They're asking me to RSVP to an event, but I don't know the organization, and I'm losing some of the content because it's taken up by this alternative text description that is completely incorrect. And I have some as well that like it is consistent, like a message from a principal or a message from an administrator, where they always have the same banner, and the same banner is always not including an alternative text and has like image 3579465, and it's like it just like irks me constantly. um, and so what I have an example at the bottom, right, is something that an announcement that I sent to my class where you can see the alternative text. So I have a picture of a girl using eye gaze, and then I have the rest of my message. I could also just mark that picture as decorative and then it doesn't show up. But so I also again want to highlight that the alternative text is not only for individuals who are using screen readers. It is required for them to equitably access your content, but it benefits everyone. And it shows that you value your content and you are kind of doing your best to ensure that all of your content is equitably accessed. And for me, like, I judge organizations and departments when I receive information and content that is not checked and is not accessible. I've had some real issues with some, because I am in special ed organizations who, don't practice what they preach and do not provide accessible materials. And so if you are a special ed organization, for me, it is your duty to provide accessible materials. And if you are not going to abide by that practice, then like, I have issues. So it's really important to consider. So the next piece is the column headers in Microsoft Word. And so again, this is something that I think is in general practice, but I want to identify why it's important. So you want to identify the header row in each table. It helps because if your table breaks apart in numerous pages, it repeats that header row, but it allows the screen reader to know kind of how to navigate the table. So if you are to just like enter a row and add in kind of your categories on the next page, the screen reader doesn't know how to organize or read the table, right? Is it going, by the column? Is it going by the row? Like, where am I going? And how am I reading this? And so it will just kind of repeat that information versus kind of knowing that it's leading up from, name, address, and phone number. So you want to always make sure that you designate a row as the header row, even if it's not spanning across multiple pages. And so what you do is you highlight that first row, you right click on table properties, and you designate as header row. In Google Docs as well, they now just added it where you can right click and it actually says pin. So they designate the header row and they call it pinning. So you pin that row. And this next piece, again, is something that can be easily added into general practice and is actually very important when you look at flyer creation, and also important for documents, but descriptive link text. So one way to navigate documents, either when you are navigating with only a keyboard or if you're using a screen reader, is to navigate via hyperlinks. So you can like scan a document with the hyperlinks. And again, just as someone who is visually scanning a document, our eyes might be drawn to the hyperlinks. And we have that agency to make that choice, right? Of like, I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to look at the links and see what it's asking me to do. We want to provide that agency to someone who is engaging with a screen reader as well. And what often happens is the hyperlinked text is just the word here. So what happens is when someone is scanning a document, all they hear is link here, link here, link here, link here. And they don't actually know what the link here is for. So they have to read the whole document to understand what the link here is. And so what the accessible alternative is instead of just doing hyperlinking the link here, you want to add the description. So what I have on my screen is you say, fill out the registration here. So now I can preview the flyer by hyperlinks and it can say, fill out the registration here, apply here, learn more here, watch our video here. And so it allows someone to just preview the content appropriately. So now I'm just going to kind of move. So before I go to PowerPoint accessibility, I'm just going to open up a Microsoft Word document, and I just want to demonstrate what this might look like. And I do want to highlight that Microsoft Word, they do have a check accessibility option, and the new version of Microsoft Word. So I will say I have the old version of Word, and it doesn't check much. The new version of Word significantly improves its checking. It will give feedback on heading styles, which mine does not. It doesn't check everything, but it's much better. So I do want to say, if you are working with an organization advocating for the newest version of Microsoft Word, makes a significant difference. And so here, what I initially check, right, is I can look at the accessibility checker, right? And it initially says, okay, you have an auto-generated alternative text. What I like about this here is I can then click on the picture and it gives me a, why should I fix this, right? And so then it also gives the steps to fix. So here again, I have my picture, and especially with a screenshot, right, something like this is really important. I'm indicating, right, where they can go to find their groups. So I'm going to right click on here and I'm going to go to view alternative text. And here, right, it's the generate alternative text, and Microsoft Word does this to improve the accessibility, but it adds this description automatically generated, which for me just indicates the person didn't check it, but it just says screenshot of a computer, which like doesn't help, right? So remember, it says image of, so image of, let's see, Blackboard left menu with week 8 peer review group indicated by a red arrow. So really kind of highlighting, right, where it is on the left menu, and that it's highlighted, right, and indicated with an arrow. And so that's an important one. So I have that alternative text, and that is, let me just make sure I move this over here. Okay. And my option here is I can mark it as decorative, but again, and now my accessibility here says it's fine. However, which we have learned in my previous presentation, is that it is not okay. So hopefully in your head, you're like, that text looks very serif-y. So we first need to do sans serif. So I'm going to go to my home, and again, Times New Roman. So my Tahoma is where I generally go. And what I do appreciate is that Microsoft Word changed their default to Calibri, which is a sans serif, which is really nice. So thank you, Microsoft Word. So I want to just show you how I do my styles and headings, because I open up my styles pane, and this is what I cannot stand. So here in my title, I can't stand how Microsoft Word has these blue heading styles. It like drives me insane. So I'm going to Control Z, my favorite keyboard shortcut. And what I do is I format it the way I want to. So maybe I'll make my title a little bit bigger, and then I want my heading one to be bold. I highlight my title and I come over here and I can arrow down and I go update to match selection. And what it then does is it changes the formatting, but now this is formatted as title. So it says current style there. Same thing, I can click this and I can go to my heading number 1, I arrow down, it goes update to match selection. And now if I want my table to be heading number 1, I click that and it immediately updates. Same thing with my questions, heading number 1. And the way I can check this is I can go to view and go to my navigation pane, and I click those like 3 little dots and then 3 little lines. And here is where I can kind of, now this is a small document, so it's not as like impressive, but it really does help. And if I then wanted to change this maybe, I can also move this to a heading 2. And when I move it to a heading 2, it kind of indents in. So it really, I love the view, the navigation pane, and the styles pane. I just haven't done it yet. You can set a default and remove that blue. I just haven't done it yet. So you can, so that you have like a new style and it always kind of pops up. So you get rid of that blue. I just haven't done it yet. Okay, so the next thing I need to look at, hopefully you're like, going through your little checklist. I need to add my header row. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to go into my table properties and I want to make sure I repeat as header row. Hit OK. And finally, I need to make sure that this is a list. So I want to come home and I am noticing that it is not highlighted. So I want to come here and make sure that it's a bulleted list, because here it will say dash dash. How often do you use Microsoft Word? And we don't want that. We want to say a list of 2. How often do you use Microsoft Word? So it'll say questions, list of 2, right? And so that makes sense. And again, gives them agency to listen and to know exactly what is coming up. So now I have a beautifully accessible document. And so hopefully that kind of helps you in terms of 508 compliance and feeling more confident about accessibility practices. So that's Microsoft Word. Now we're going to move on to PowerPoint accessibility. So really all the same guidelines in terms of fonts, bulleted lists, and so on and so forth. But there are some additions. So we're going to talk about colors and visual cues, and then reading order, which can be a little bit confusing. So here are some important considerations for visual presentations. Slide titles should be meaningful and unique, so each slide title should be different. This is important because an individual with a screen reader can skip through slides based on slide titles. So if you have the same slide title, like definition, 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 then they don't know which one you're on. So you want to be like definitions 1 of 3, definitions 2 of 3, or part 1, part 2, part 3. Indicate, right, when there's multiple ones. You want to try and keep with a maximum of 6 to 8 lines of text if you can. That's just kind of good practice. Really try and keep the minimum font size of 24 points or above, especially for individuals with low vision. Again, that sans serif font. Having tables, charts, and graphs on their own slide to improve the readability is also important. And as someone is navigating with the screen reader, to listen to those. And avoiding transitions and animations for individuals who are seizure sensitive or visually sensitive. Those can kind of trigger migraines, seizures. And so avoiding transitions and animations is recommended. And so color contrast checker. So this is also something to beware for individuals who are color sensitive. And my favorite color contrast checker is WebAIM. And this is a free color contrast checker, and it allows you to ensure that your color contrast within your text and your background, but also your logo for your company, department, organization, is contrast compliant. And so I have a link to the contrast checker there, but what I love is it also has something called the eyedropper. And so here, so I have a flyer here, and what it allows you to do is you can, because no one, well, not no one, but it's difficult to find the color code. So when you click on the color, you can choose the eyedropper, and all you have to do is click on the actual color, and I will demonstrate for you when we go to the PowerPoint, and it will pick the color for you. And then here we can see that my kind of like darker red, because I was checking this right here, in AA passes, but AAA fails for normal text. But with my large text, it all passes. And so this goes along by the WCAG guidelines. And so the color contrast is included within the web content accessibility guidelines. So that's really important. And the graphical objects and user interface. So this is like buttons, logos, things like that. And so this really helps you to ensure that those things are accessible. Again, and this is for someone who is color sensitive. So if I have difficulty seeing color contrast, then I'm missing content if it doesn't have the appropriate contrast. This piece I was guilty of a lot. When you are providing additional cues, right? Keywords, important information, and avoiding underlines that indicates a hyperlink. But you want to make sure you don't only use color to indicate something, because again, for someone who is color sensitive, they miss that indication. So you want to make sure you have at least 2 cues that are beyond color. So for me, right, and as you see in Blackboard, I make sure it's color, highlight, bold, and italicize. So I kind of do it all. And so that's where you want to make sure that you are providing an indication beyond just color, but not underline, because underline is traditionally an indication, again, of a hyperlink. So it indicates confusion. So you don't want to use an underline, because underline is for hyperlinks. And charts and graphs. So this is important because, again, you don't want to use color as the only indication between data sets. So in my first chart here, between my 3 data sets, and now I always encourage to have data included if you can. But the only way to tell the difference between the 3 data sets is color. So again, if I'm color sensitive, I have no idea, Series 1, Series 2, or Series 3. Whereas in the second chart title, Series 1 has a diamond for the data points, Series 2 has a square, and Series 3 has a triangle. So ensuring, again, that your chart title is accessible to anyone who is looking at your data is crucial. So making sure that color is not the only indicator of different data points and data sets. And you also want to make sure that you have appropriate alternative text for your charts or graphs. And my approach to charts or graphs is that I describe what I want to show with the chart title. So my interpretation, because generally we're putting charts and graphs in there for a reason, right? So we're choosing the scale, right? The y-axis and the x-axis scale to indicate a particular reason, right? We want to show visually, right, an increase. So for example, in this chart, I might describe and say, a line graph depicting 3 data sets, and whatever the data is for, showing reading growth of 3 students, but specifically student number 3 starting as the lowest performing and within 4 months ending as the highest performing, right? And so I like to provide the interpretation as to why I'm showing the graph versus kind of, Series 3 with 4 data points and describing it that way. I'd much rather than have a table and have the graph, have the data points. But that's kind of the way that I do it. And then the next piece, this is confusing, but important. And there are ways to kind of mitigate and make sure that it doesn't kind of come up. But reading order is important because it is the order in which the screen reader reads the items within a PowerPoint. So it's crucial for contextual understanding. So if your screen reader is reading things out of order, you might have no idea what's happening within the slide. And so here, what I always recommend, just like we did within the Microsoft Word document, is in PowerPoint, go to the accessibility tab and you go to check accessibility. What I do like here is in the accessibility menu, they also have inspect without color. This is really helpful to think about individuals who are color sensitive. Also, if you only have a black and white printer, it can show you what your presentation looks like in black and white. But that check accessibility piece is really helpful and will get you started. Now, again, I want to highlight the newer version of Microsoft Word has significantly more accessibility features and checks more than the version that I have. So promoting that and advocating for that is important. So it highlights errors, but again, it does not check everything. The newer one will prompt you to check color contrast, which is helpful. I like that you can keep the accessibility checker open while you're working, and that helps you so that you can do it while you're going. So making sure that you add alternative text or marking things as decorative while you're building really helps to eliminate that remediation time at the back end. And so going through and doing it during the creation phase, I find makes it easier. And so there we go. And so if you need to check the reading order, here's how you do it. You go into Home, and then there's a range, and you choose the selection pane, and it lists the objects on the slide. Now, if you have the older version of Microsoft Word, it reads the last item first and it ends with the top item. The newer version of Microsoft Word will show the list and it numbers it 1 and it starts at the top and moves down. So Microsoft Word did update. It was a good update, but know that it's just a little bit more confusing, especially for me because I don't have the new one. So here, before we move on, I want to go into PowerPoint. And I also just want to go to the WebAIM color contrast checker. Okay. So here's the color contrast checker. So I'm going to kind of tile my windows here for you. Oh, no, not this one. Oh, no. Okay. So here's my presentation that I want to check. And let me just open this up here. So in my presentation that I have, I want to go to review, and then I can open up this check accessibility. And this is where I have my warnings. So I can come here and it says, hey, you should check the reading order. Now, I want to tell you, if you stay within the layout, right? So when you go into insert a new slide, right? And if you stay within the layout of the slides, you're going to be fine. The reading order is fine. Reading order becomes an issue when you add things. So here I added pictures outside of the template. That's why it's confused. So here, what I want to do is I'm going to go to Home. Oops, here we go. Why does it not want? It's giving me an issue. So again, it's going to come up here. So it allows me to it gives me the steps. It tells me why. I don't know why it's giving me a weird home menu here. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's see. Sometimes just want to make sure I save it. So sometimes it does happen, and you always want to make sure you save it, save as, before you leave, especially once you are, here we go. I just didn't click into the slide. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Okay, so here what I want to do is I want to just make sure. So I'm going to look for my arrange. So I want to come in here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so here I am in my accessibility kind of view, and I have my selection pane here. So when I open up my selection pane again, so I have the older version, so I'm starting from the bottom. And when I click on these items, it highlights what is read first. So I have title, and then I go content placeholder, which is my text. And then I have picture number 2, and then picture number 2. So that's fine. If I wanted to move them, I just click and drag. So now I have title, content, picture. And so it just wants you to check it. Again, in the newer version, it goes 1, 2, 3, and that's all it is. And now it also wants me to check the reading order of slide 3. So I come in here, and this is where, oh, this one's messed up. So it starts with picture number 2. So I want to start with my title. Oops. I want to start with my title. Then I want to go with my content placeholder. So title, content, picture, and then text box. Great. So I've checked those two, and so they go away once I've checked them. And then it highlights that I have duplicate slides. So here, maybe I'll write I'm going to move this. Maybe I do AT continuum. Okay. So now I've because in slide 3, I moved this, it's now asking me to double check the reading order again. So it will kind of continue whenever you move things, it'll bring it up again. But that's all it navigates or kind of tells you to do. And in the new one, again, it does give you color contrast. So what I do want to show you is how to check the color contrast. So here, I'm going to close out this accessibility. I'm going to increase this. So what I find in many of the kind of templates, especially in Microsoft PowerPoint and Word, is when you have a link, for some reason, the font that the link defaults to is pretty rough. So here, if I want to look at the contrast, I click here, and I don't know the color because I want to check this light green with the dark green. So I'm going to click this eyedropper, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to click, and now it automatically fixes it, which is awesome. And then I'm going to do the background. I'm going to click the eyedropper again, which comes here. So now I have those two colors, and now it tells me, oh my gosh, it fails everything, right? So this is telling me that is a completely unacceptable background and foreground color contrast. So I need to change that in order to abide by accessibility practices. And again, like once you kind of check them, it really does, it will stand out, right? So I can just change this. And what would be important if I was continuing to work on this, or if I was creating like a theme for the department that I was using, is to change within the theme, right? To make sure that my default of changing all the fonts is now not that green. So on this slide, what I also need to do, it didn't tell me to check the alternative text, but what I want to make sure is I do check the alternative text, because again, these pictures were copy and pasted from the internet, and they have alternative text, but they are wrong. And it's just, again, from their random descriptions. So here I will say that, like, in my opinion, and as the person who created these slides, they're decorative, right? It's not kind of adding any additional content. So I can click here, and same thing. This is decorative. So I'm going to mark them both as decorative. Hopefully you can kind of note to yourself, there are two things on this slide that need to be fixed right now. Hopefully in your head, you're like, oof, that color. I don't even need to check that. And the second thing is the font. Oof, that's a rough one. So I know I need to kind of go back to have that sans serif. And we want to make sure we have that 24. And so once you kind of, again, like get into that flow of knowing what to look for, and I really do emphasize that within an organization or within a department, if you can create a template for your slides, for your flyers that is accessible, it's going to greatly improve the work that you're doing. What I have for you all is an accessibility checklist. So I kind of have pulled everything together when it comes to the general accessibility checklist for you. So I have like in general, then I have a document accessibility checklist, a PowerPoint one, and then I do have a PDF just in case. But what you're going to be doing kind of in the next activity is downloading and creating content through AI and then checking the accessibility and fixing it, which will be really important, and kind of reporting back. And I want you to try and, after you fix it or before you fix it, kind of in this process, see if you can push AI to create accessible documents. And that's one of kind of the pieces that I'm encouraging you to think of, is that as you are creating content, can we then add that piece of and make it 508 compliant, and kind of seeing how we can kind of support that. So I know that this was a longer video, but thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to your accessibility notes and looking at how you're fixing our AI outputs.